Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of 2D10 Character Creation Tutorial. This episode, I'll just step back one tick and help you make another vampire character. I know you're probably like, hey Nate, I thought you would help us with other games besides Vampire. Yeah, the voice inside my head, I will. Now settle down and let me get through this one. So I'm still hanging out in the world of darkness for a bit. I want to remain consistent with the theme here and just get some of those solid gold oldies out of the way. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do a different edition or an entirely different game setting next. This video will not be a commentary on clans, nor will it be a walkthrough about maximizing your points. Maybe someday Professor Power Gamer will make his own videos. This video is designed to help you make new, entertaining, and hopefully three-dimensional characters, step by step, to play in a V20 game. So here's what you're going to need to make a character. A V20 core book, also known as Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, a character sheet for V20, either a digital interactive sheet or a printed physical one if you're like me and you're an office worker from 1986. I like paperwork, so shut up. Pen or paper, etc. Now, there are some tremendous V20 sourcebooks from Onyx Path that you can use to enhance your character creation. However, I will not be using them during this character creation video for the sake of simplicity. In V20, there are some basic precepts you want to keep in mind when you sit down to create a character for play. Your personal gaming group or your storyteller might change these up to fit their chronicle. First, you can create a character of any age, culture, or place of origin, pending storyteller approval. All characters are assumed to be neonates with no more than 25 years as a kindred, so keep that in mind when you make your character. Second, despite what some folks may assert, combat and dice pools should not be your primary focus when creating a character. Like all games and editions in the world of darkness, story comes first. Finally, it's your responsibility to create a character and take on a role that's not detrimental to your coterie. You may have heard stories about how Vampire is just a game of screw your neighbor. This happens when players and storytellers don't effectively communicate the specifics of their coteries, their packs, or their cabals. It's the world against your coterie, not you against your coterie in the world of darkness. Keep that in mind. There are some more basics we can get into, but we'll talk more about them as we create the character. Okay, let's not dawdle any longer and get down to business. Let's jump to page 80 through 82 and look at the quick character creation list. This section will be a significant help for you if you're new to character creation. Before putting pen to paper, let's think about what we want to play. Before we ever think about points, dots, or discipline powers, we should really contemplate our concept. Like the last video, and probably every tutorial I'm ever going to make ever, I'll be building my own character. So feel free to use the character I make as a source of inspiration, or just play the character I create. I don't care. Okay, so let's get into it. I want to play the type of character that lurks in the shadows, using the darkness to their advantage. They gather and hoard information for their own benefit and the benefit of their coterie. Additionally, this skulking creature uses every advantage they possess to unsettle the opposition. Armin Picker was really nobody in life. He was intelligent, sure, but he never stood out amongst his peers. His family was not quite poor, they just didn't have a lot. They lived in a modest house in the suburbs that looked exactly like all the other houses on the block, in a modest town full of modest people. Armin's parents worked, and they worked hard. They were basically never home. Armin spent most of his time taking care of himself. He was self-sufficient at an early age, and when his parents split up, Armin was an afterthought. He lived with his mom, a worker in a large manufacturing plant, and visited Dad, a cross-country trucker, one weekend a month. Armin felt intense loneliness on most days. Always alone in a crowd, nobody seemed to notice him. And maybe if he were a different person, he'd have acted out or rebelled and dyed his hair green, but Armin never felt that he deserved attention. In fact, by high school, Armin found unnecessary attention to be bothersome. Armin's favorite hobby in school was eavesdropping on students and teachers. He'd become so naturally invisible, people seemed not to notice or care when he was around. He'd keep online journals full of rumors and gossip and the private secrets he'd collected in his spying. Armin would spend his nights online, making websites and blogs, spreading rumors about folks and businesses he didn't like. He became addicted to the power that his spying and observation skills gave him. Yeah, he got a person or two fired from a job or a prom king embarrassed, but his little campaigns never really did any serious harm. Armin graduated from high school and applied to a few colleges. He never got any letters back and ended up taking a few night classes at the community college. Armin wasn't exceptional at anything and took a few general education classes and a computer class to fill his schedule. During the day, he worked in a call center giving technical support, using this time to expand his hobby of collecting people's private information for his own dubious purposes. After a year at community college, Armin transferred to the city college. To fulfill his elective requirements, Armin took a philosophy class with a famous elderly professor. While Armin was genuinely enraptured by the professor's lessons and his rants about democracy and civility, he could never get up the courage to talk to the professor. Instead, he spied on the man like he had done with so many others before him. It wasn't long before Armin began to uncover some of the professor's strange behaviors. First, he discovered a relationship that the professor was having with one of his students. Assuming the relationship was purely sexual in nature, Armin began to search for further indiscretions. Then, Armin noticed that the professor seemed to have a greater access to the faculty than an ordinary professor would have. In fact, the professor seemed to be able to almost control the people around him, emotionally. Armin himself was conflicted about the man, and they'd never so much as exchanged words. Finally, Armin was sitting in the university library late one night after everyone had gone home. Nestled in a shadowy corner and out of view, Armin began to hear voices in the lounge. Slowly, quietly, Armin snuck through the library to where the voices were coming from. Armin saw his professor addressing a group of people he didn't recognize. The people listened and took notes as if they were in class, but the lesson being taught didn't seem like any Armin was familiar with. The professor spoke of a beast, of controlling urges, and of following traditions. Armin huddled in the shadows for hours, listening to the lesson. He wasn't sure what he was hearing, but it sounded like things a cult leader would say. An hour before dawn, the assembly dispersed, and the professor was joined by his young lover, the student from Armin's class. The two men embraced, but then Armin saw something that made him question his own sanity. The professor's mouth opened, and fangs distended from his jaw. He bit into the young man's neck and began sucking. Armin Picker felt panic flood his brain as his flight response kicked in. He clumsily turned and fled, making a ruckus as he ran. He never bothered to stop to look behind him. Armin began to question what he saw as he tore down the alley and away from the university. He ran until his chest burned and his heart thudded a mile a minute. He stopped under a streetlight and doubled over, trying to catch his breath.
I was wondering how long it would take for you to figure out that Critias was kindred,
a gravelly voice said from the shadows. Armin fell to the ground, startled by the voice, and began to crawl backwards.
What? Did you think I wouldn't notice you?
The owner of the voice walked into the halo of light and looked down at Armin. The creature was a thing of terror, with twisted features and giant protruding tusks. Unfortunately for Armin, the nightmare was only just beginning. Tonight, his anonymous life among humanity would end, and his anonymous life amongst the Nosferatu would begin. Alright, let's get back to the character sheet here. Like last time, I've jumped over to Mr. Gaughan's character sheets. You might have other sources for your game group, but this is what I prefer. For this episode, I opted to use the 2-page Neonate interactive sheet, but there's tons of different versions available on the website. Try them out. If you've watched my V5 character creation tutorial, some of the next portion may be familiar to you. And that's okay, I'll only explain things as they become relevant to the character creation. So first, let's choose our concept, clan, nature, and demeanor. On page 80, there's an entire list of vague character concepts. Some folks might be tempted to just pick from that list and trudge ahead with character creation. And let's be real, even I've done that more than once just because I wanted to play Captain Murder Punch and I didn't want to be creative. I'm not saying you're wrong for doing that, but I'm not going to encourage that either. Take the time to think up a concept, and you'll have a much more rewarding experience in the end. But I digress. Let's talk concept. My character, who now goes by Picker, was a loner who liked to spy on people for personal benefit. Sometimes he used that information to hurt people who've crossed him, if the fancy strikes him. I'm going to call this concept scandalmonger. A scandalmonger is a person who collects and disseminates rumors. This is why his sire chose him. Speaking of sires, Picker was embraced by a member of Clan Nosferatu, the hideously deformed and skulking sewer rats. Let's call Picker's sire Wineka. Next, let's talk about nature and demeanor. Archetypes. Your nature is who your character really is. This is the dominant trait that drives your character's personality. This isn't all your character is, no more than you are one trait. Demeanor refers to the way you present yourself to the outside world. Think of this as your character's mask. It's often different than your nature, but it doesn't have to be. Read through the list and see what makes sense for your character's personality. So, for Picker, let's assign him rogue for nature. Maybe some folks thought he would be a loner, but I see Picker as much more selfish. He's only really interested in himself and less about making his way despite hardships. Since his embrace, Picker's inner ugliness has bulged out like a pus-filled abscess. This new disgusting continence has made him memorable to others for the first time in his life. He's really fallen into the role of being a Nosferatu. I'll assign his demeanor Creepshow. When Picker decides to show the straights who he is, he really gets a kick out of disgusting them. Okay, so we just finished the entire top of the sheet. Awesome. Let's jump into the meat and potatoes of the character now and define Picker a little bit more. Below we have attributes that are divided into physical, social, and mental. Each of these categories is further divided into 3 subcategories. In physical attributes we have strength, the raw brute power of your character. Dexterity, a measure of your general physical prowess in things like speed, agility, and reflexes. And finally, stamina, a measure of your character's health, toughness, and resilience. In social, we have charisma, your character's ability to entice and please others through personality. Manipulation, your character's ability to get others to do what they want through self-expression. And appearance, which is a measure of your character's distinct features, attractiveness, or flair. It's not merely a measure of your character's raw beauty, but a combination of looks, style, and attitude. Finally, we have the mental attributes. Perception is your character's ability to observe their environment, intelligence is your character's ability to grasp facts and knowledge, and wit measures your character's ability to think and react on their feet. Okay, so now we need to prioritize these attributes and assign some dots. Remember, your character will start with 1 dot in each trait, unless your character is a Nosferatu, which we'll get to in a moment. You'll start by picking a primary attribute for your character. For Picker, I think his strong suit would be mental. Even though he never did exceptionally in school, he never failed, and it's likely he just never cared about grades much. So let's assign Picker 7 points to his mental traits. Next, Picker's probably a bit more physically capable than he is social. He wouldn't break any athletic records, but he can run and climb like a typically fit person. Let's assign 5 points to physical. Finally, we know that Picker is socially inept. In life, we know he didn't have many friends, and he was generally unremarkable. The embrace has changed one aspect of that, but it didn't favor him in the looks department. 3 points are prioritized to social. Now, let's assign some points. You'll notice that all the attributes start with 1 dot in each. That's intentional. Those points do not count against the numbers you just prioritized. That said, let's get into assigning Picker his points. First, I'll assign 4 dots to Picker's perception. Whoa, right? 5 dots total? Yeah. I think that Picker's ability to perceive is particularly exceptional. This is the type of fellow that can spot a professional poker player's tells. Next, I'll assign 1 dot to Picker's intelligence. Picker is average. As I mentioned above, he's not stupid, he's just not exceptional by any means. Finally, I'll place 2 dots in Packer's wits for a total of 3. This makes his wits suitable. He's seldom surprised or left speechless. Next, I'll move on to the physical attributes, which I have 5 dots to assign. Strength gets 1 dot. Picker is average, and he can lift around 100 pounds. Next, we'll give Picker 2 dots in dexterity, for 3 total. Picker possesses some degree of athletic potential. He was never a marathon runner, but he was always in relatively good condition. Finally, let's give Packer 2 dots in stamina. Again, he's in good shape, and he never really got sick before the embrace. Alright, let's wrap up the attributes with social. This one is a little different because of the Nosferatu clan weakness. Nosferatu can never rise above 0 dots
in appearance.
Cross it off your sheet and forget about it. Nosferatu are ugly, twisted, walking breaches of the Masquerade. Invest in scarves and wear lots of layers, fellow Nazis. You're not tricking anyone into thinking you're still human. No disrespect, fellow Nos, but we know the score. For Picker, he's about as charismatic as a block of slowly molding cheese. In fact, I would say that the embrace has not done Picker any favors, as he now leans into his unsettling characteristics. We'll leave old Picker here with a charisma of 1. That leaves us to put 3 dots into Picker's manipulation. Picker is skilled at creating smear campaigns, fabricating lies about his enemies, and telling a convincing tale to get what he wants. Picker, when we get down to brass tacks, is essentially just an undead con artist. Some folks watching this may wonder about my choices for dot assignment. How will these picks impact my discipline use or combat pools? Some of these dots are really high, while some are really low. Would a more average placement serve the character better in the long term? My answer to this question is simply, I don't care. I try really hard to use the character creation system to represent what I wrote in my background. Is Picker going to be the master of animalism or be able to trade blows with the sheriff and come out on top? Probably not. But these deficiencies are what I find entertaining about playing a 3-dimensional character in the world of darkness. Alright, so let's get moving forward with character creation. Next up are abilities. On your character sheet, you can see that abilities are divided by talents, skills, and knowledges. Talents are things that your character intuitively knows. You can strengthen these abilities through direct experience, i.e., by actually doing them. These abilities can be executed by most individuals to some degree. Skills are abilities learned through training and instruction. Skills are things that most people can attempt without training, but do so at a greater difficulty. Knowledges involve the domain of the mind.
How would you know if someone stole your mind?
Typically, knowledges involve some sort of academic training. However, they could also be self-taught. Thanks, V20, for teaching me what an autodidact is. If a character lacks a knowledge, they can't even attempt an action that would correspond to that ability. Much like we did for attributes, we will prioritize these abilities. The primary category gets 13, secondary gets 9, and tertiary receives 5. These do not start with 1 in each dot, and no individual ability can be higher than 3 at this stage. So I'm going to assign 13 to Picker's talents, 9 to his knowledges, and 5 to his skills. I'm not going to explain what every ability is to you, because that would take 4 hours. However, I will show you what I assign, and what number of dots, and the corresponding level description. Under talents, I'll assign points as follows. Alertness 3, competent. You keep a sharp eye on things. Awareness 2, practiced. You sometimes get strange vibes from a particular direction or vague area. Empathy 3, competent. You have keen insight into other people's motives. Streetwise 2, practiced. You're accorded respect on the street. I figure after his embrace, Picker spent a lot more time among street people for obvious reasons. Subterfuge 3, competent. Criminal lawyer. Skills are next up for me, and they get 5 dots. This one is pretty easy. Larceny gets 2 dots. You could run a shell game hustle on the corner. Remember, Picker's primary modus operandi isn't necessarily breaking into places, but he's done it in the past. Stealth gets 3 dots. Competent. You have little difficulty finding prey from evening to evening, and this is kind of a no-brainer. Picker has spent his life going unnoticed. It's practically muscle memory at this point. Let's wrap up abilities for now by assigning some dots in our knowledges. As noted in the background, Picker went to college and learned some things while he was there, but a lot of his knowledge is self-taught. Let's see how we can reflect that in his abilities. Academics gets 2 dots. College. You can quote from classics, identify major cultural movements, etc. Computer, I've assigned it 3 dots. Masters. You know what to do with a text command prompt, and let's be real here, if Picker hadn't been embraced, he'd probably end up doing work with computers for the rest of his life. Investigation gets 2 dots. College, police officer. I think that Picker has spent an abundance of time investigating people around him for both pleasures and for profit.
And I'm still a piece of garbage.
Law, 1 dot. Student. You've paid a traffic ticket, and you know whether to plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest next time. To be sure, you must know what the laws are to understand how to properly bend them. Finally, technology gets 1 dot. Student. You can perform simple modifications and repairs. Picker can repair his own computer, and he could probably deactivate an electronic security measure if he needed to. And that's it for abilities for now. So let's move along rapidly to the advantages portion of character creation. This is the point where we get into character backgrounds, disciplines, and virtues. Backgrounds are just what they sound like. They are advantages of relationships, circumstances, and opportunities. Backgrounds represent external traits, not internal ones. Let's start here since we're on the subject. You begin with 5 dots in backgrounds. Backgrounds can be found starting on page 110 of your V20 book. First, I need to address my character's generation. As I mentioned in Picker's background, his sire is 9th gen, making Picker 10th. To be 10th generation, I need to spend 3 points on generation to represent this. Next, I want Picker to have some ongoing relationship with his sire. I'll put 1 point in mentor to represent that relationship. Picker's sire isn't a super old or super powerful kindred, but he has some reputation among fellow Camarilla in the city. Last, I'm going to give Picker 1 dot in resources. He specializes in blackmailing and ruining reputations, and he's made enough money to keep his equipment running. Okay, that's all the backgrounds for now. Let's get into virtues. Virtues represent your character's outlook on unlife. They help to shape your character's ethics and morality, as well as aiding them in defense of the raging beast that claws at them from just below the surface of their psyche. In other words, when you're faced with frenzy, ethically questionable behavior, or terrifying and disturbing stimulus, your virtues come into play. I will describe the process for characters on humanity, which is the default for most Camarilla vampires. Some vampires follow alternative forms of morality called paths of enlightenment. Perhaps we'll get into those in a future tutorial. You will have 7 points to distribute among the 3 virtues. Each virtue starts with 1 dot in each. Conscience keeps the beast at bay, defining what urges are acceptable and unacceptable. I assign 1 dot to Picker's conscience. This puts him at the level of normal. Next, I give Picker 3 dots in self-control. Self-control represents the character's discipline and mastery over the beast. For someone like Picker, it takes a great deal of discipline and self-mastery to do the sort of things he does. 4 dots in self-control makes him hardened. Lastly, courage. Courage allows your character to stand in the face of fear. It's a combination of bravery and grit. Picker was rarely intimidated by others in his mortal life until he discovered the world of darkness's truth. I've assigned him 4 dots, making him resolute. Next, let's jump to page 127 and look at the disciplines. These are the supernatural powers of the kindred, granted to them by the embrace and passed down through the generations by their clan's blood. Each clan has 3 disciplines considered to be in clan. For the Nosferatu, their disciplines are animalism, the power to control and communicate with animals, and even exert themselves over man and other supernatural creatures. Obfuscate, a vampire's ability to hide themselves, and potentially others, from sight or alter their features through mental trickery. And finally, potence, endowing the kindred with supernatural strength. We have 3 dots to assign disciplines for Picker. Per the book, you may assign these 3 dots in any way you choose. For instance, you could put 1 dot in each of the 3 disciplines, making that character well-rounded in their powers, or you could put all 3 dots in 1 discipline. I will give Picker 3 dots in Obfuscate, because I don't see him spending too much time talking to rats or throwing sewer lids. I do see him as the type of character who would skulk in the shadows, hide in plain sight, or even occasionally disguise himself to look like another person. Now, as I'm reading through the discipline levels, I note that level 3 Obfuscate, Mask of 1,000 Faces, uses manipulation plus performance to determine how well the disguise works. Sadly, I didn't pick any performance when I assigned dots to my character. Does this basically mean that I'm out of luck now? No. This brings us to the finishing touches. In a minute or two, we'll get some extra points to spend on our character. First, let's do a little bookkeeping and figure out some of our other traits. Humanity. Your character's humanity score is a combination of their conscience and self-control. For Picker, his score would be 6. If you turn to page 310, you can read more about morality and the effects of humanity. A humanity of 6 is described as removed. A vampire with a humanity of 5 or 6 has already slipped a little into callousness. People die, stuff breaks. A vampire below the human cultural norm has little difficulty with the fact that she needs blood to survive, and she does what needs to be done to get it. Picker is obviously a little morally loose with how he operates, and this may be an issue for more virtuous people or kindred. Next is willpower. Willpower is the character's inner drive and ability to overcome unfavorable situations. Willpower has a permanent rating and a temporary rating that will fluctuate during gameplay. Your permanent willpower is equal to the courage trait. For Picker, it's 4 dots. Note your character's blood pool. This is listed under the generation background on page 114, and more info about how blood is used is on page 268. Picker's pool is 13. For this, I simply black out the boxes that won't be used, leaving the rest open for use during gameplay. Now let's spend some freebie points. A list of freebie point costs is on page 82, and you get 15 points total to spend. As a side note, you can always pick merits and flaws, up to 7 points in flaws to gain freebies, but I won't be doing that. A list of merits and flaws starts on page 479. Okay, so what does Picker need to finish him up as a character? First, we know that Picker would have had to develop some skills in performance after his embrace. He really had to learn how to act so folks would believe his disguises. Let's give him, say, 2 dots in performance. Next, while Picker takes sick delight in his twisted visage, he's learned that his behavior just doesn't fly some places. I'll give him 1 dot in etiquette to represent that. Also, since his embrace, Picker's had to learn how to survive in areas that would be considered non-typical. 1 dot in survival should work to represent that. Picker has slowly built a network of infiltrators on the streets and online. To represent that, I'll give Picker 3 dots in contacts, equaling 3 major contacts. I'll also give him 2 dots in alternate identity, details of which I'll work out with my storyteller before we start game. With my last 2 dots, I'll give Picker 2 additional dots of willpower. I think he's probably pretty willful. He spends a lot of time in his head, plotting and working out how to ruin folks. Merits and flaws are a fantastic way to round out your character, and there are dozens of options in the V20 book, as well as a bunch of books like Lore of the Clans. You can take the time to work with your storyteller on assigning these to your character. However, in this tutorial, I'm going to skip them and move along with wrapping up the character. When you look at the second page, you'll see a lot of stuff left to fill out. Some of it'll be necessary and some of it won't, depending on your character and your chronicle. If you look at page 86 under the heading Spark of Life, we've already figured out most of this by coming up with the character history. This section does present some fun and exciting questions to ponder when making your own character. You're advised at this point to breathe life into your character's points. However, putting points on the sheet and trying to make sense of them later will make this process exponentially more difficult from a story perspective. So take the time to contemplate your character and how their lives and experiences have shaped them. Because characters, especially vampires, should be unique, passionate, and memorable. You may find the back of your character sheet to be the perfect space for additional details. Personally, I tend to make a document with Office or something similar for both my storytellers and my own reference. Do what works best for you and for your group. All right, that's it. We've now made a character for Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive video about V20. Are there still things you don't understand or something that I missed that I should have included? Leave me a comment down below, like, share, and subscribe so that more folks can see my videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.